So now you'll notice over here in the right-hand side under nodes, you'll notice that it says arena composition. And so now I'm able to bring that in as a texture 4D. So that's a nice feature because then you can use your live feed from Arena into Wire and then output it out. So it's a different way of working. Um, Typically, what I do to kind of save on power or programming, or what do they call it? Basically memory and processing power on my computer, I'll typically run one or the other, not both. I can run both, but I also have I have OBS running right now and Discord, and like you all know on how this goes. When you have 20 million different programs, you're trying to find the one that's odd man out and which one's going to save you some speed. So for the time being, I'm just going to turn off Resolume. That will help to kind of to save on the processing power of my computer here. Some things that the texture in and you have your texture out. Your texture out is going to be your source output. So there's three different kinds of patches. When you're using wire, we should probably go through that first. In your patches, you have this category option. It's not selected. It's set to none by default. So when you're creating a wire patch, you're basically creating a self-contained program, a little mini program within wire. You're not allowing it to be affected by Resolume. So what this will do is it'll basically change the way it's being interpreted into Resolume Arena or Resolume Avenue. Okay, so we have the source, the effect, and the mixer. So the source and the effect are the two ones that I probably use the most. The one of the newest patches that I had just created actually does do a mixer, but typically I don't do very much with mixers just because there's not a big request for it. However, it is something that I'm looking more into because I think there could be a case for people using mixers. But my understanding is many of the VJ users out there, they're typically using Resolume for its layers. So a source is just that. It's like its own kind of contained, it's like a self-contained like mini program that creates creates an animation for your layers. Right. So I have a couple different patches. I have Moray cycle, and all it does is just randomly cycles through expanding and contracting circles right on top of each other, and it creates this moire pattern, and it just plays infinitely as long as you want it to play, and it just cycles between the two breathing circles. And so that's a source that can be basically imported in, and then you can use that to add to your layers as a looping animation, for example. The great thing about Wire is that it kind of acts as a looping animation when you use it as a source. Uh, However, the advantage of a source versus a loop is that a loop is a static animation that plays over and over and over and over. You can make as many loops on from many different programs and have many different loops with different aspects that have been changed incrementally. The thing that I gravitate to very much is Wire because the fact that I'm able to give my users the ability to make those changes on the fly for themselves, all within Avenue or Arena. So, for instance, in this particular case, when I have my patch here, I'm going to go to the texture in, I'm going to put just the default Wire logo, and I'm going to click the textured out. This is what we're going to basically create, or I'm going to kind of show you through how this works. Um, Basically, this is a very basic and generic kind of wire patch. It looks complicated, but really, when it comes down to it, we can take all of this that you see in front of you, and we're going to boil it down to this smaller version of the same thing. This is just 4 nodes put together with a texture out as an effect. And so I'm going to basically give you an idea as to how this is created by using some basics first, and then we'll go through this and explain how this works. So that's what we're getting into. The effects, and I just want to quickly, touch on that. So, like we were talking about just a second ago, the sources are basically like a layer. It's like a wire patch that is a self-contained. It runs for itself in your layer, and it just continually does whatever it does, what it's been set up for. Most sources are things like solid patterns, looping animations. There's just a myriad of different things that you can use them for. The effects is a little bit different because the effect is something that you apply to what you have in a layer already. And so it will utilize what you have as a looping animation or a video or any of those other kinds of graphics or media that you have within your arena or avenue. It will play in that continually, and then that effect will make changes and alterations to those sources. So now we're going to go into how this basics of this patch and how this works. This is a very simplified version, but it's the basics of how that is created. I actually have a texture in, which is that is just a texture of the wire logo. It's going into what's called a video mixer. A video mixer is nothing more than basically layers in Photoshop. It's the same kinds of process. Layers in Photoshop, you probably already know this. I'm going to quickly kind of explain this. You have two different pieces of paper, one on top of another. Each layer is another stack on top of the very last one. It goes from top to bottom to which one takes priority over the others. There are some cases where other nodes don't follow that same rule, but in this particular case, Video Mixer is top one is the one that is on the topmost layer. That's the thing you're going to see mostly. Okay. Now, there's a couple things that are going on with this texture. We're going to go back to that just real quick. One of the things that you'll notice is that this W has this checkerboard option behind it. That is an alpha channel. This is something you're going to see in a great deal of different graphics programs. There's going to be this default checkerboard. That is for an alpha channel or a transparency. That means if I were to put something behind this, that area that is the W is on top of it, let's say, and there's something below it. Okay. That something below it is going to bleed in the areas where there's that checkerboard. I'll give you an example. In this video mixer, I'm going to add in another layer, another input. So I'm going to click this plus where it says inputs. And as you'll notice that now I have this layer 3. Layer 3 has it's empty, and then you'll also notice that I have this texture 4 leading into layer 1. I also have some things that are going on here that are attached to layer 2. We'll go through this in just 1 second. I just want to quickly give this example. So I'm going to detach this here, and I'm going to bring up the texture 4. When I bring up texture 4, I'm also going to add in a solid. I do that by double left clicking on the window in the background, a blank space in my working window, and I'm going to do solid. I'm going to start typing in solid. And what I'll do is I'll find something that says solid color. This solid color, it will set the default as red. I don't know why that is. I believe it's just because they had to pick some color, and that is the color they chose. So I'm going to change this to gray, just make it a little bit easier on our eyes. I'm going to drag this to the layer, and then I'm going to click on the layer of the video mixer. And what you notice is that now the replacement of the solid color is going to replace what is in the background of the texture in. To give an example of this and how this opacity works, if I were to go back to the text card and then go back to the video mixer, you'll notice that you cannot see that gray area. As a matter of fact, if I change this to like for instance, a red color or an orange color, you'll notice that it still does not change this. But if I were to change this texture in back to the wire logo, I go back here and you'll notice that it's the orange in the background. So that's how alpha channels work. That's a basics of how alpha channels work. I think it's important to kind of explain alpha channels because a lot of my work and a lot of the things that I do tend to have something to do with masking, layers, luminance, and alpha channels. So I'm going to take my layer 1, I'm going to bring it back to my texture in, and I'm going to bring it back to layer 1, and then I'm going to apply this delay, I'm going to apply this side of the delay to layer 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it back to what it was before. So I'm going to take this back to 2, and so now you get this bleeding effect. Let's talk about what's going on here. What I'm doing is I'm actually creating a feedback loop. Oftentimes, I hear that people are using analog cameras and they plug them into their TVs or to their computers, and they have it facing the TV, and the camera is looping in back on itself, creating a feedback loop. That's basically what we're doing here. Nothing has changed. There is no magic mirrors. It's just the process of having a feedback loop. So what I'm doing in order to make this happen or give it more features is I'm basically having it set to a transform that's going off in the distance at 48, and it incrementally creates a mirrored effect. So when I take this and I drag it up, or I drag the opacity up so that you can see that, you'll see this mirroring effect. You'll see that it's it's creating that wave that you see oftentimes from analog cameras. And then what I'm doing is as I'm feeding it back in on itself multiple times, I'm then also sending it out back to the texture out. This 5-node system could be saved out as a effect in the patch, and then this could be used as a effect in Resolume Arena. That's it. That is the basics to how to create a wire patch. That is the basic understanding of how this works, but I'm going to also go into some other examples. So here, what I've done is I've taken this texture in. This texture in is actually, I want to use it multiple times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the hub, which is nothing more than basically a way to repeat that same information over here. This allows me so that I can have multiple hubs that can be far, far, far away and not have to worry about like, okay, where the heck did I put that one thing? Or if I had like another texture, if I had like an image, I could just drag the image in and replace it on that window. So I'll give you an example. Let me move my screens around here real quick. And I'm gonna move this out of the way. And then I have this skull PNG. I'm just gonna drag this skull PNG in, and you'll notice that now I have this image texture. Okay. I have this hub. What I could do is I could just actually just click and drag this into the hub. And so now that is the hub, right? That's what the hub is here on this particular node. If you go down here to this hub, that's not attached to that. So this is that wire pattern. So that's to give you an example as to what that does. I'm going to disconnect that for now. Actually, let's reconnect that. I want to show an example of some of the other things that you can do with Wire that is very nice. This is one of the newer features within Wire. You can actually click and drag to a wire that's already previously set up and release, and it'll automatically replace it and go right directly to the patch, the node that you're attaching it to. So that is a nice feature. Uh, right at this moment, I'm going to delete the skull. We're not going to need that right at this moment. And I'm going to actually check my resources. You'll see that there's a couple things in here. I'm going to come up to wire and I'm going to go clear unused resources. This makes it so that the patch is as clean as I can possibly make it. If I don't have anything in the patch that I don't need, I want to get rid of it because then on the flip side, my users are not being affected by what I have in the patch that doesn't need to be there. So now let's go through this second system. There's not much different from here. This basics delay, the only thing that I've changed here from this example to this example is rotation. Excuse me. So what you'll notice, excuse me, is that I have this kind
Can
of,
I?
Go ahead.
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
I think you have like 3 instances on your video mixer and transform and delay on the other side, on the first thing.
Right
Uh,
here. Hmm.
yeah, and on the second delay you don't have. So what does the instances do in this kind of thing, or how does it scale with instances?
So that is one of the things that you have to take into consideration when you're doing wire patches is watching the instances, and it's the short version is because of how. Let me see how I can play this. Okay, let's give this example. If I come over here and I actually make a circle, CIRCLE, right? We'll do shape. And then in this node, in this, there is transform. Okay, and then in my transform, there should be a place for, uh, actually, I think it's if I do a grid pattern, I think I have to do. The short version is the instance is how many times the circle is being made, right? So the instances here is referring to how many times it's instancing those patterns. And so here, for example, in my delay, I have 3. It does nothing for me here. It repeats it. I can actually take it and I can remove those instances and then reconnect it. You'll notice that there's 2 instances still available, and that's because the video mixer has 2 here. It has the 2 layers, and that's considered like an instance, or it's created 2
Ah,
instances.
okay.
So
Thanks.
what you would do is you can also merge it. That is one of the things that I've done, merge, right? And then when you merge it, it basically merges those 2 instances together. So if you ever run into an issue where you have too many instances and it's really clogging up the system, merge them together. Um,
Awesome.
Typically, the best advice that I can give to you is try your hardest to just kind of keep that nugget in the back of your head. If you're running into issues with speed in your patch, make sure that there's not multiple instances that kind of got added in. Like as you noticed, like it went from 2 to 3 just because I added in another layer. So that is a good question. You want to kind of keep that in the back of your head. Um, and mistakes happen all the time. The thing I would say is it's an amazing thing, but it's also something to keep watch on. That it's good. That was a good question. So in this particular case down here, when I have this transform, I'm actually just rotating it by 0.028 or 248, which just gives it this slight rotation. You'll notice that as I add more rotation or more opacity to this, you'll see more of the looping, the delay, the feedback loop coming in back on itself. So as this number increases, you really see it now here, but as it fills itself in over and over and over and over, it's still running, even though we can't see it physically. It is still rotating, and then the reason why is because the delay is off kilter, and so it spins around. So if you change your opacity down, your opacity is going to give you just a little bit, not the entire thing, right? It's not going to show you the entire the entire it's gonna like get transparent as it goes around. And as it gets, so the first set is transparent by 10, the next set is transparent by 15, the next, or excuse me, by 20, by 30, by 40, by 50 until it gets to 0 and it turns invisible. Okay. So that's kind of what this one is about. I wanted to kind of explain that. One of the things that's also nice here, and this wasn't explained to me, I actually was looking for information about the transform node. You have a series of different options here. The translation is up and down. That was in the instructions. So if I move this up and down, you'll notice that it changes where it starts, right? This is top to bottom. Okay. And then you have your rotation, which is the rotation of the W, right? And then you also have your scale, which changes the scale uh, scale this way and the scale this way. So that would be skewed horizontally and vertically, right? If you wanted to, you could actually scale them both at the same time by adding in a float, right? If you do a float in or float, and you just attach it to the scale, it'll automatically attach it to both sides. To the Because even though that's a float 2, you're basically telling the system that the float 1 is a value for both sides, for both x and y. Okay, so that's what that's doing there. So I'm telling it a 0.7 of the screen, scale that up and down, and so it's echoing that, as you can see, as it goes out. The other thing is anchor. Anchor is the one that was not expressed in the instructions. Wire has done an amazing job with their tutorials, or at least I think personally. Now, I come from an IT background slash graphics background, computer graphics background, computer arts. And so I have a better kind of understanding as to what to expect with certain things. And I have a bad habit of tinkering through things. And that's probably kind of to my detriment, because then I think to myself, I forget to explain those things. Um, but that being said, like the anchor, let's get back to that. I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting off track. The anchor itself is where the center point is of whatever it is that you're doing, right? So in this case, it's the W. The W is dead center 0, 0. So if I move this -1, it's going to move the middle to the left. Okay. Let's change this back to 0, 0, and we'll take the scale out. And then I'm just going to move the -6. You'll notice that it's moving that direction. It's moving -5, it's moving to the left, right? Negative 105, excuse me. And then if I move it negative, it's going to move it down. And then if I move it positive, it's going to move the anchor up. Now that's not it's not foolproof, but that's basically the gist of the anchor, is where it starts, where the center point is as it's going around in a circle. So now let's go to the basics of 3, the delays. So this example is going to be a little bit different. We're not actually going to use the W in this particular example. When I go to this example, the texture out, this is what you're going to see. I'll go through some of these nodes here. This node system is used in many different things, and this is one of those things with GLSL, and uh, it's understanding the processes of how the things combine. That takes time. That I can tell you about nodes and how the nodes work, but sometimes teaching you about how the nodes interact with each other is just going to take some tinkering. You're going to have to play with some of the wire nodes to see what they're going to do and how they're going to interact with each other. This is an example of that. I'm going to give you some information about what these nodes do. This node is the transport time node. All it does is it gives you the input of information of time in seconds. It gives you time in bars, and then it gives you time in beats. And this is based on your sync button. You know, the when you're in Avenue and Resolume, you have the option to sync up your beat. That's what this goes along with that. And so if you're hitting the tap button and then you hit resync, it'll sync it up to that beat to this. I'm using, in this particular case, I'm actually just using it for transport time, just for seconds. Okay. I'm not using it for beat or bars at the moment. I'm just using it for seconds because I just want a continual line of time. That's all I'm looking for. I divide that by this number. Anybody care to say what? I think this is like 5 million. Okay. And then I'm using it towards a static. The static is nothing more than what you used to see on your old TVs. This is that kind of same kind of pattern created in digital form. Without this time, if I just connected it to time, it'd be a little too fast. So that's the reason why I added in the divide node. So I'm going to connect this to the time, and it's going to slow it down for me. I like this pattern, and I like this because it's noise, it's static, right? You can do all kinds of crazy stuff with static, but I want to pixelate that so that the pixels that you see here This static that you see here is small or is larger. So that's what I did here. The pixelate actually creates the rows and columns to make them appear larger. So if I add in 32 by 64, it'll actually make those even larger. Because it's a 4:3, well, actually, in this particular case, it's a 16 by 9, but in most cases, like 1920 by 1080, is a 4:3 kind of ratio. So in this particular case, as long as it's divisible by, what is it? The old calculations from computers, right? So you have 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, so on and so forth. Okay. So the first number is going to be uh, 32, and then the second number is double that. So I'm going to go back to what I had before, 64, and then this number is going to be 128. And that's going to give me squares. That's the reason why I want to do that, right? It's going to give me these squares. So now I've taken this same pattern and I've actually added it to the video mixer. But this video mixer is a little bit different. We have the transform like we had before. We have the delay like we did before. And also we also have multiple instances. Let's fix that. So I'm going to take this down. Come on. There we go. And we're going to drag this in. And so now we have this pixelated pattern. Why is this pixelated pattern different? Because the video mixer is actually using a Luma key mixing. Like I said before, the video mixer is very similar to the layers process in Photoshop or any other like graphics related program that has a layers. There's usually typically with most of your art programs, you have the options within layers to set blend modes. Blend modes are an amazing thing, and I would strongly suggest to anybody who wants to learn more about how to really create interesting looks and feels, learn about blend modes. It's the greatest thing you could possibly do for your artistic career is when you start to understand how multiply affects the layer below, an overlay affects the layer below, the screen layers, the burn layers, the all the different layers, right? It can make a tremendous difference. It can really create a dramatic effect that you were not expecting. I like Resolume Arena and Avenue because there are so many different things that you can do within. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I like Resolume Arena and Wire because there are so many different blend modes that are not available in Photoshop. There are certain things like, for instance, Luma Key is not, as far as I know, knock on wood, it's not a blend layer within Photoshop, right? But it is here. So if I go into the video mixer and I go into the nodes on the right hand side, you'll see Luma Key 1. There's actually a different Luma keys. They affect differently in certain different ways. I'm using in this particular case, we're just going to say Luma key 1, right? And then what I've done is I've just changed the opacity so that it's darkened in. When I'm using the Luma key is actually creating a certain kind of like almost a threshold on top of the layer below, right? And then, but some of that layer below is actually showing through, so you're getting this streaking effect, right? This is great. It's wonderful. Great, Jake. Why the heck would I ever do this? I'm going to give you an example. Over here, when I go down to here, this is a better example as to what you can do if you have the ingenuity. I've taken this particular type of pattern, this white kind of hexis, or not hexis, this white pixelated noise that's going up and creating this thing, and I've blurred it. I've then transformed it so that it's squished together so that it streaks even more. And then I've added a threshold on it. The threshold is great because it gives it this kind of flow like fire. However, I also want to pixelate it so that it's only 3 colors, so that the blur is only showing 3 shades of different colors. Then I colorize that and you get the final output. I'm going to actually get rid of these 2 layers because we don't necessarily, actually, we do need those. I forgot. Okay. So we're in the colorize. The colorize, to create that color, I'm actually taking two linear nodes. This has changed in the latest version of Wire. It used to be that you used to use a gradient map, I think it was called. And in gradient map, you actually had the ability to set two colors, and it would make a transition between the two. The Wire folks decided that they thought that didn't work out as well as they wanted it to. So what they did was they actually created the linear node. They actually put the colors in the linear mode, and so now it works the same as l- um, the gradient. What's it called? It wasn't the gradient. So there were two different gradients before, and so now they've just added it to the linear um, to make it basically to simplify it so that people didn't get confused with this one versus the other gradient that was available at the time. And I forget off the top of my head what it was called. But basically now this or the previous gradient and the other previous gradient has been replaced by linear, and you join the two of them together to create a palette list. If I select over this node, you'll notice that there's a series of colors here. This is the newer thing within Wire. They made an entire update on color, which is amazing or is fantastic because now it has its own separate place and it makes more cohesive sense to me. Um, I'm basically taking these two linear from black to red and then from yellow to white, and I'm joining them together to create a larger palette of different colors. And then what I'm doing is I'm actually expanding that palette of 10 to 20. And then after I expand the palette from 10 to 20, then what I'll do is I'll actually create a clamp. So there's three different options here. Repeat is repeating the colors multiple times over and over and over. Depending on how many sets of outputs you have, it'll just keep repeating it. Clamp goes, I think, from the beginning to the end. So if you have 20 rows, it'll fill in the colors in between. Ping pong will actually take the values and like it'll create a ping pong. So like if you have red and black, it'll go black, red, black. If you're doing repeat, uh it'll do the same thing. However, it blends nicer when you do the ping pong. I guess is it's hard to explain without showing it, but the short of it is there will be cases where you'll want to do the ping pong and sometimes you'll want to do the clamp. The shift is to shift the color. If for whatever reason your color ranges or your palette that you've created is not hitting the ranges or the areas in which you want to hit, the shift will allow you to shift the colors left or right so that it'll affect the colorize better or in a different way. Then when you take that shift and put it into a texture from data, the reason why you're doing that is to change it from this previous color 20 or this float, right? You're changing that float to a texture 2D, and then you're inserting it into your colorize as a palette. And what you have to do with your colorize is you actually have to change it to palette. If I change it to color, you'll notice that it's just red, right? I can't plug in the palette that I've created. And the reason being is because it has to change to palette first before you can actually then attach it. Just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Okay, so this last part, this is the gradient. The gradient is there because of a multiply, right? What I'm doing is I'm multiplying my color here by the gradient, which is basically making sure that the top area here, for example, is all dark, and then it goes from dark to white, right, as it moves down the screen. And so this area here, I don't want to see the red flecks at the very top. So I'm using that as that multiply to remove the top half of those colors that I don't want to see there. This is a brief example of what you can do with just a little bit of reflection as to what you're looking at, and then deciding, what's the best steps to make that happen. Okay, so we're going to go on back to the basics. We're going to go back to creating this. So this is using the very same kinds of techniques, just adding a little bit more. This is a float, one that's just being used to for the accumulate. The reason why is this is basically like it's telling it I want to accumulate by however fast this is to the accumulation. So as I slow down or as I increase this number or decrease this number, it'll speed it up or slow it down, right? This is just a different way of creating this. I wanted to give that as an example because it's just to show you that there are multiple ways to get to the same effect or same options. I could, in theory, take these two and add them here. But in this particular case, I wanted to use the new feature accumulate. So I've added in the float, and then the float is attached to the accumulate, and the accumulate, it just continually accumulates the number. It just keeps going up. It never changes. I'm dividing that by the 4 million, and then I'm creating that same kind of static pattern that I was creating before. I am also using that same accumulate to adjust this fractal noise. So this fractal noise is basically accumulating the Z float within the phase offset. So I'm going to take this off. Okay. If I change this number here, this is the phase offset in the Z. Okay. So this is X. I think this is X. X, and then this is Y. Or I think it's backwards. I think it's X is this way and Y is this way. Okay. Um, and then this is Z. Z in this particular program is just a like another it's another way of changing or cycling the pattern. But again, like I said before, this is a fractal pattern. This or a fractal shader. This is not a vector shader. So the Z is typically used as a depth, right? Is the three-dimensional space and used in vectors. But in this particular case, it's another value. It's not used as the in the way in which we typically use it when we're doing three-dimensional space. So I've taken this fractal noise and I've actually just got it on this kind of accumulation. I could create a repeat, but I didn't want you to see that repeat pattern, so that was the reason why I used accumulate. I could have used this here. This would have done the same kind of thing. In hindsight, I could have even both of them are will work. I'm doing the same thing as I was doing before, but in this case, I'm actually adding the two together. Let me just turn this one down. I'm turning down the delay so that you can see what the pattern is without the delay. So I'm creating this noise by basically utilizing this pattern, okay, which is coming from the fractal noise. And then I also have the static noise. So I'm adding the two of those together. And then my video mixer is set to displace. I'm actually displacing the two patterns together to create this kind of crazy monstrosity. And then I add the delay on top of it, which is set to scale by point or 1.01 in both the vertical and the horizontal. So now as I take this down, it creates this kind of star field as if you're like drifting through the stars, right? But as it's set to displace, so it'll create all kinds of crazy effects. Now I'm going to go to this wire patch here, or this example here, where we're going to create this kind of bleed effect. This color bleed effect is actually basically doing the same thing as we've been doing before, except what we're doing is we're adding in the color offset. The color offset allows you to offset the color of a media. So if I took, for instance, this media hub and I just basically clicked and dragged it into here, you'll notice that it should be cycling colors, and it's so very. You may not be able to see it because it's very, very, very faint. I can barely see it on my screen. So let me take off the oscillations. So I'm going to move my oscillations off. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hike up these color differences. Am I still connected somehow? Why am I not? Give me 1 second. So let's do another color offset just to rule that out. Yeah, okay. So now we've gotten a little bit more of a now you can really see the clear difference between the two. So if I take this and I drag this up, now I have a color offset. The color offset is taking your red, green, and blue channels and it's offsetting them from each other. And so that's what this is creating, right? This offset is also excuse me, is oscillating. So if I take this off and I go back to this, I should be oscillating. And I'm not oscillating. Oh, I know why, because I need to connect this back. There we go. So now it's creating this kind of blurred effect. It's just oscillating to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right. And the reason why is because I'm using a scene oscillator. Um, a scene oscillator is nothing more than it's going from -1 to +1, -1 to +1, -1 to +1, so on and so forth. And then what I'm doing is I'm actually creating this X1. This is doing it in reverse. So when I connect my scene oscillator into the X minus one, I'm actually doing the reverse of that. This is going from +1 to -1, +1 to -1, and this one's going -1 to +1, -1 to +1, so that they create that L or step stair kind of effect, and it bleeds off into the other direction. So I'm using a float 2. This float 2 is only affecting the X. Or excuse me, this float that I'm creating here is the negative of this one. I'm only having it affect the X, and then this one is only affecting the Y. So they're staring together as I change the color offset of red and blue, which is creating this kind of effect. All right. So now comes the fun part. Here is the patch. I have a hub in here, I think. Yep. Okay, so here's my hub. The hub is basically the beginning of this patch. All this stuff here is just coming down in here. And actually, I can get rid of these now. I don't need these. Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, so this is doing a very similar thing as we were doing just a second ago. We have our hub. I've converted this to grayscale to make this a little bit easier. I'm converting it to grayscale because then I don't have to worry about the colors. I can just use a black and white, straight black and white, right? I will colorize it from this linear texture. I've expanded my texture output, and I basically have it happening twice. I have the same kinds of filters happening twice. So if I go to Video Mixer, this is one set, which is here, okay, and then my other set, which is here. No, not that one. Sorry, this set here. Okay, so I have two video mixers that are running independent from each other. And one video mixer, I'm creating this texture like I was doing before. I'm using transport time to divide it by a number. Okay. In this particular case, we haven't talked about inputs. So this is the first time that we're getting into inputs. So let's discuss this a little bit. If I have a wire patch and I want you to be able to change some of the effects and how they happen, I can actually change them by adding in a what's called a float in or an input. My inputs will allow the user to make additional changes to a specific value. And that's how I can create interactivity for my users. In this particular case, I have a float in, and I've changed the name of the float in to static speed, just a generic name for me to remember what it is. So then as I change this, you'll notice that the speed changes within the static that I've created. This static is to kind of create or I tried to create something or emulate something that kind of looks like brushed metal, right? But it's that motioned brushed metal. It's moving. It feels like it's moving fast. And so what I wanted to do is I took the static, I did the pixelate as I did before, but then I also added a pixel blur to blur out that area in the distance of 180. So it stretches it out and blurs it, but only in the horizontal, not the vertical. Okay, so you get this kind of crazy pattern. Pixel blur is a really cool feature because pixel blur is different from the normal blur. This is a more fancier version of blur. Um, but it's not as cheap. Cheap meaning if you want to just blur something out easily, there's three ways you could blur something. Well, there's probably more than three ways, but in this particular case, we'll just say for the sake of argument, there are three different ways you could blur. One of them is using pixel blur. The other way is using just blur. And then there's a final option, which is anti-aliasing. And when you do anti-aliasing, it basically dumbs down the graphics so that it looks like it's blurred. And you can do that, if I remember correctly, it's a part of the merge. And there should be an option for anti-aliasing. No, I don't think it's that. I think it's actually part of the shape render. I think it is. Shape renderer, absolute anti-aliasing right there. So if I have a circle, we'll do the circle again, right? It would help if I learn how to spell Circle. Can I use that? No, I can't. I have to use the other one. And shape and attach the shape into there. So now if I change my anti-aliasing to something like 100, it'll blur the edges of that. Um, it's a cheap way of creating a blur, basically. Um, it's a different way. Some cases, most cases, you could just want to use the blur, the this option, and then there'll be other cases where pixel blur may be a better option. It really just kind of depends. There's not really any kind of quick and dirty, other than sometimes just the normal blur works just fine. There's no need for the pixel blur, so it's just kind of a user preference, really. But in any case, using the video mixer to again take this and merge it with my colorized, my white and black, straight white and black screen, my straight black and white version of the texture in. And it's doing the same thing as we were doing before. We're creating a delay, but this time there's no transform. It's just creating this kind of crazy pattern here. Then what I also did was I created a second version of it that's just a little bit smaller, right? You'll notice there's a slight difference in variation when I go back and forth between both. But I could up this by basically scaling up my pixel blur. And so now I get kind of a different, like it's a little easier to see the differences between the two. What I did was in the very, very top one, I actually created what's called a mask, and I masked it in on itself. This mask takes things that are the black color and turns them transparent, and things that are white are opaque, so you can't see through those. So the white is the only thing that's showing through in this mask. And I do that because then what I'm doing is I'm actually creating a displacement in this final one, which is only displacing certain parts. Then what I did was I actually did another video mixer, another displacement to give it even more craziness. Finally, I also added in a red shift and a blue shift for my color offset here to create an option to change your colors as you see fit. So I did a minus 1 to a positive 1, but I'm adding it into a map. The map is a different option to change values. This makes it so that this value can be -1 and 1, but I'm remapping that value from -1 to 1 to -300 and 300 so that the value range that you see that the user sees is -1 and 1. The real true value that's set to the map is -300 and 300. It used to be, well, actually, they've had map for a while. However, in theory, you could do the same thing by multiplying 300, right? I could add in 300 here and then just basically connect this here. And so negative 300, or excuse me, negative 1 times 300 is negative 300, and positive 300, positive 1 times 300 is 300. So this will, in theory, give me those same kinds of numbers. But in this particular case, I've just kind of really kind of like the map, because then also could be a different value. Like there may be cases where I can't use 300. I need to use, 0.275 on one side and then 300 on another. This allows me to make those value changes. So then I'm adding them to a float too, so that I'm only changing one of the values on the vertical or horizontal. I'm not changing both. And in this case, I'm changing just the horizontal value, which is the X value, right? So it's the left to right. So I did that on the red shift and the blue shift. I left the green shift as is. No particular reason. It's just a choice I made. I could, in theory, if I wanted to, I could duplicate this a third time by basically just clicking all three of them, hold Control, click all three of them, and then I'll hold Alt and I'll drag out, and now I have a third set. Okay, and then what I could do is I could drag this down, and then I can plug in this third set here, and so now I have a red, green, or red, blue, and green shift. So all I got to do is just change this name. This one's going to be the green shift, and I put H for horizontal, green shift. Oops. And now I can basically change that value as well. So basically that's basically what you're going to see in a patch. That's the short. I say short, but that's not really short. That is a good understanding of the basics of how to start a patch and how to kind of get an idea as to how patching works. Um, some things to add to this. One of the things is you'll notice that over here on the right hand side within wire, these are the effects that I was talking about, the sliders that I was talking about that you can change. There are multiple different options. You have the option to add a Boolean, for instance, which is a check mark of a true or false value. You have the option to do a drop down menu. You can do a color. So if there's like a color specifically that you want to add in, you can add those colors. You can give the user the option to make those color changes. There's options. There's all kinds of crazy things in here. And maybe what I can do, if you guys is still find this interesting, I could also create another patch that has different kinds of nodes, and we can discuss that as well if you guys are interested. If there's specific nodes that you want to know about, let me know. We can discuss it. I'll make a patch and we'll go through it. Do you guys have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns? What the heck did I just watch?
First of all, I think it's really awesome what you did there and how you explained it. For me, it's totally clear what you've done, but I'm not that new into wire myself completely. So I was completely on. I was completely in. So I completely understand what you're talking. For me, it's just one question. Is
Sure.
there also a way for like a palette in, or do you can you just give a color in?
Is there a way to do a what in? I'm sorry.
A palette, color palette.
Oh, like you do your own color palette? There are a couple different
No,
features you
like
can.
sorry,
Go ahead.
because like in Arena, you
Mhm,
can also um, choose sometimes between color,
mhm.
static color, or palette.
Yep,
Um, but here it's just that you can input color in, but not palette in, I
like
think.
this. Like this?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can do a color in. So if I have like, we'll just take this again. I'll do a hub. I take this hub and drag it. I gotta drag it up. It's in the hub. Okay, and then I'll do a colorize. There's the colorize. Connect this to the color and this to this color or colorize. And so now it's setting to the black. I can change it to yellow by basically this new color in patch. So now it gives me the option for HSB or RGB, and then it also gives me analogous, monochromatic, complementary colors, split complementaries. The recent colors that I've used in a color palette option, there is an option to overwrite these color palettes that you have here, and I don't know if I think they actually will go to Arena. If you change these colors, you should be able to see them in Arena. We can actually we could check that if you're interested. If I go new, wait, actually, I don't want to do that just yet. Let's copy this so I don't have to. I just paste it in. New. Don't save. Paste. And then texture. I guess I should have just added that in. And then drag this over here. And then texture out. And then do effect. And do color out. We'll do colorize. Jake's test. That's a good name. And then save. And yep. And then I'm going to minimize that and open up Arena. Okay, so here is the HSB or the Jake's test, right? I think if I go to palette, okay, so there's the options right there. I think I can change that. So in Resolume, you can actually choose a color and then just click and drag it into the palette. And when you click and drag it to the palette, it just adds it there. So now but I have to save that as a preset. So then I believe I just go save and then we'll just go Jake and then save and then close this. And now if I just apply this to this, did it save the yellow? It did. So the palette can be saved. The color palette can be saved with that set. Did that answer your question?
Um, not quite, because I was going for like the palette you can choose with color. Yeah, that one as an overlay, like of. But I think you don't need it in a wire
Mm-mm.
thing. You make it on top like that.
And then you have the option to add those palettes in here. Trying to remember off the top of my head how that works. I know that now that this palette is here, you can make it so that that is the palette within the threshold. But then I think in order to make that happen, I think I have to set it to palette. So if I go back into wire, I think I can do that by instead of doing it this way, I would need to do like I did before, linear
Yeah, okay. Totally get it. Yeah.
and then add it in as a palette. And then
Mm-hmm.
when you're in Arena, then it'll say, "Oh, hey, this is like with like." So
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks.
no problem. So yes, I have no problem with any questions, comments, complaints, concerns you guys might have about Wire. If there's anything I can help you with, let me know. I'm always working on new patches. I just dropped 2 patches on Juice Bar today. I'm trying to do the finalizing of them. One of them is the drip and bleed, which is one of the effects that I've been working on, which is this one where if I turn this off. So if I do drip and bleed, it looks like this. So drip and bleed, and it does exactly that. It creates that kind of drip and bleed effect. And then the other option was I just created the A and B mosh, melt and mosh, which is the idea of taking 2 different kinds of things. Let me turn this one off. Drip and bleed. Turn that off. Threshold. Turn that off. Okay, so now I have that video, and then I should have the other one, B. So now if I have A and B and I swap from A to B, it creates that kind of melt and mosh kind of look where it's melting and it's creating that PMOS look. And as it gets to A, it does the reverse. And as it gets to B, it does the reverse. But I do all kinds of different things. There's this fire one that I've been playing around with, or that I've had for a while. Let me go back to this and turn this off and then off. So then this creates kind of that glowish kind of firing kind of look. So yeah, I create all kinds of patches. You guys have an idea of something you want to see, let me know. I'll make it happen.